Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to the Silmarillion Film Project. This is session 18 of season 7, and tonight we are going to discuss episode 4 of season 7. Unions will be forged, trauma will be revisited, and everyone will. Well, one can never say live happily ever after in the season of the Near North Anodiad, and everyone will live happily for a very brief time at the end of the episode. I was thinking about that. I'm like, this has got to be one of the last and happiest episodes remaining in the entire season, right? Mostly. I mean,
yeah.
It was pretty. In the end, it was pretty cheerful.
Nobody died.
Nobody died. Yeah.
Episode.
Nobody died in this episode. That
There's
makes it remarkable.
To people's deaths.
Well, yes, of course. Yes, exactly.
But no actual deaths occurred on screen during this episode.
Yep, trauma was recalled but not inflicted, which in this season is a big, it's a big deal. It's a big deal. Anyway, before we get going, quick announcement. So just looking ahead at the Moot calendar, the fall Moot season is now beginning. It is now August, and our first fall Moot is this very month, Cascade Moot in Seattle at the very end of the month on August 31st. And then we have the delightful Ranger Moot in September, our first ever outdoor adventure moot in which we're going to be doing a bunch of reenactments and stuff. Marie, it was funny. I was talking with Adam, our regional moot director, because we were talking about reenactments, and some people had contacted us and everything, and Adam was like, yeah, there's this other group of people who are big into reenactments, called A Long Expected Party. And I'm like, I've heard of them. And he's like, yeah, I was thinking of reaching out. I'm like, I know who you could reach out to. So anyway, yeah, he didn't know that connection. So I was like, yeah, I think we could talk to somebody there. Anyway, in October, we have New England Moot and Middle Moot, and then Carolina Moot, and then eventually Sunshine Moot. But of course, also our international moots, Stutt Moot and Willow Moot, 2 more European moots that are planned. And soon we will be releasing details on the next Osmoot as well. Which reminds me that I didn't even introduce our guest here tonight. Though, Alana, you've now been here so often that, you've seemed like you're practically a regular now. But I am joined, as always, by Marie and Nick, and we are joined tonight once again by Alana Mushin from Australia. Thank you for joining us in the middle of your Friday there.
Oh, absolute pleasure. As you can see, I'm in my office.
Yes.
I have connected to Film from stranger places.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
I think the very first time we discussed script outlines, I was in the middle of moving. I lost power in the middle of a rainstorm, and I conducted the latter half of the conversation from the front seat of my car on my cell phone.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
And as you can see, there's daylight coming through the windows.
That's it. Yes, it's actually a much more reasonable time of day for you than it is for us, actually.
I am tomorrow.
That's it. You are tomorrow. It's always fun to hear from the future. In Australia. Now, of course, there's one other thing I want to announce quickly before we move on. Actually, one announcement and then one fun update. So my announcement is I want to draw people's attention, if you haven't heard about it, to the Kickstarter that we are doing for Rings and Realms Season 2. So the second season of the Rings of Power is coming soon, and we're gearing up for Season 2 of Rings and Realms, the analysis show that Maggie and I host with Ben Davis from Studio Lab, who's our director. And our Kickstarter has been going now for over a week, and I've been really excited by all the support that we have received so far. We just made an announcement today. If you go to the Rings and Realms YouTube page, you can see both. You can see both our original Kickstarter announcement where we explain things a little bit more, and then you can also see the update video that we posted today. And sorry, I'm laughing because the Studio Lab people are kind of funny. Maggie and I were standing there doing updates and stuff, and then they're doing funny things in the background. I was cracking up when I was watching this video. So anyway, I recommend you watch the video. They're kind of funny. Exactly, Mrs. Manrique. Yeah, there's a murder scene in the background. I didn't even know that was happening. Anyway, so if you go to Kickstarter and search for Rings and Realms, or you can find the direct link in our video descriptions and in various other places. I would encourage you to do that. We are trying to raise money for more crew and more crew time this year. We had a fun time doing Rings and Realms last year, but it was all done in a very, very rushed and compressed fashion. So being able to pay some folks to be able to pay some crew to be able to help us, to be able to thank them for their time. It was a very crunched, totally volunteer project last year. And it would be great to be able to have some resources to be able to pay people, and also to bring in some new team members and special guests. So the thing we announced today is that Jordan Rennells, the audio editor of the Prancing Pony podcast and the marvelous designer and creator of the long expected soundscape, is going to be partnering with us at Rings and Realms this season, and he's going to be providing an entirely new immersive audio experience for Rings and Realms this year, which is going to be really cool. And we may have another special announcement soon for another special guest who's going to be joining us in Rings and Realms this season, with possibly more announcements to come soon. So I just encourage folks to support us if you can on Kickstarter. Would really appreciate it for Rings and Realms Season 2. And speaking of special guests, that reminds me of my little update. So I'm delighted to report that Maxim Baldry is just delighted to be cast as Maeglin in Silmfilm. It was he was like, "Oh, I love playing villains." I'm like, "Oh, you'll like this role," right? And because he's been reading the Silmarillion. Maxim is one of the members of the cast who did not know Tolkien that well when he began, but it was one of the things that was really fun, being at Comic-Con again, getting to meet cast 2 years down the road, right? As you could totally tell that they'd been studying. Like, for instance, Ismael Cruz Cordova, who plays Arondir in the show, I had him pegged at, in the lower quartile of Tolkien familiarity on the cast when I met them last time. And he was the one, in the Hall H discussion, somebody asked a question about Ents. And Ismail, grabs his mic and he's like, "Well, the Ents were made by Yavanna in order to protect the trees." And I was like, look who's been studying. That's really great. Anyway, and so similarly, Maxim Baldry has been reading the Silmarillion for the first time since the first time I met him, but unfortunately he hadn't gotten all the way up to Gondolin, so he didn't know the Maeglin story yet. And I actually have a picture. I don't have it with me, but somebody took a picture of me talking to Maxim, and you can actually see me. I'm like, my hand is reaching into my pocket. I was getting my phone because I was like just about to ask him, and I decided instead of having him read something, I was going to recite it. I'm like, could you do me a favor and just say, like, I was going to give him some, stage directions, just say, "The King's grace is greater than you know," right? I was just going to have him say that and film him saying that. But just as I was pulling out my phone, like, one of the handlers came and pulled him away because it was like a photo shoot he had to do. And I'm like, no, come on. But I might get another chance if I see him at the at a premiere or something like that, then I might get a chance to ask him again. But
that description was a wild ride, I'm here to tell you.
Anyway, it was cool. But no, he was excited and honored to be cast. He's like, "When did you cast me?" I'm like, "It was like 4 years ago." And he's like, "Really?" I'm like, "Yeah."
We were his big break.
We were his big break, exactly. Like, the kind of unspoken thing between us was like, "How did you hear of me?" Right? Like, and I'm like, "I don't even know." Like, I didn't nominate you. So anyway, kudos to whatever foresighted person nominated Maxim Baldry all that time ago. Because it was like, was it season 4?
It was well before.
Before the beginning, yeah. Far enough before that I had wholly forgotten it when season 1 of Rings of Power came out.
Myglin isn't born till season 5.
Oh, it was season 5?
It would have been part of season 5.
Yeah. Though that's still at least 3 years ago.
It was.
When that happened, yeah.
Rings of Power came out, and well before.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I just want to report to you that, in fact, we now have there are now 2 people who have been officially informed of their, Alan Sisto being the other one. In fact, they were both there. I had the two informed cast members in the room at the time. Both Alan and Maxim Baldry were there in the room. And anyway, so
there's a third one, but it's for certain values of informed.
Well, there are others we've reached out to on Twitter, but we don't know even for sure that they saw it.
Well, one responded.
Wait, which one?
Yarwin?
Holiday Granger.
Okay.
Responded.
Yarwin did. All right.
Hakon
it's like just with
was
a
the
general
nominator of Maxim Baldry.
Yeah. Hakon gets credit for that.
Well, of course. I mean, that's only fitting, I suppose. That's excellent. Anyway, so just wanted to provide the update, and I was this close to having footage, but
maybe next time.
But not quite. Maybe next time. Yeah, maybe next time. All right, so let's get to the episode, because tonight, indeed, we have an episode to discuss, episode 4, Towards Union. I think that's a good working title. Much better than my suggestion, which was the State of the Unions. But anyway, but anyway, I really like this, and I really enjoyed the parallel between, like, the Morwen, Hurin, and Fingon, Maedhros, like the 2 different unions that were being sort of brokered during this episode, and the way that those were unfolding, I thought were really interesting. And the parallels kept being more intricate than I expected them to be, right? At first I was like, oh, well, that's a fun thematic connection. And then by the end I was like, wow, that actually was much closer than I thought. And we should say,
I don't recall us having a conscious conversation about that, actually.
And I should say, of course, that it's particularly fun, right? The Union episode is one of the first active collaborations that we've had, right? We had, so both of the 2 of you, Ilana and Marie, worked together on this episode, right?
Yes.
That's a lot of fun. So you can see here how you can find it. Go to forums.signumuniversity.org, and then in the film script, season 7 script discussion, and then season 7 episode 4, you can find the text.
A link will appear in the chat momentarily.
So we wrote it together by dividing it up, so you can play the Lindia game with.
right to guess which bits are. I was looking for a green stone, but I didn't find it, so yeah.
Right, so Aragorn didn't help us.
Aragorn didn't help. Yeah, exactly. That's proof right there. Okay, so let's talk about the Union of Maedhros. Is Emros on a different slide, or is he just, or does this cover Emros as well?
Yeah.
Okay. I want to start
with... all the A plot should be on one slide.
All the A plot should be on one thing. Okay.
Yeah. You can go back and forth, but you can go back and forth however you like. The third
point is here too. I really liked the conversation with Emros. That was really, really fun. Like, Emros speaks at last, right? Other than in very short and sardonic quips, right? That was really, really interesting. Tell me about that. Tell me about, and of course the sort of emotional and psychological freight of the return to Mithrim was a really interesting connection there.
Right. So one of the challenges with the storyline of the Union of Maedhros is that we know the oath is the motivation for it,
Right.
but no one can talk about it. Like, no one can come out and say, hey, we need to attack Angband so we don't attack Doriath.
Right.
Because no one could admit that, like, kinslaying is on the table, right?
Right.
Unless one of the Feanorians is really nihilistic and doesn't care about diplomacy at all.
Right.
So
I think
enter
that
Amras.
the line where Amras is like, "But there would be fewer dead elves." So that was my favorite line. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So he was left around in our storyline to be somebody who had zero hope for the success of the Noldor in Middle Earth, the fight against Morgoth. He has zero confidence in any of that. And therefore, this was a perfect opportunity to let him give voice to it. But I had to at least give some clue as to why he's talking like this.
Right.
Because you can't just out of nowhere just be really super depressed
Right.
and mad at the world. So,
And it has been a long time since the traumatic event. I mean, it was halfway through season 3, not even halfway through season 3.
Right. It was 450 years ago,
right.
for instance, that his brother died. So you would think he maybe got over it or something.
Right.
Or you would be forgiven for thinking that he might have moved on in some way from that.
Right.
So having the hey, we're back in Mithrim, which is where you were right afterwards when this first happened, I was allowing that to be the way to get him back into that headspace.
Right. And he has... Oh, wait a second. Let me pause there. Has he talked much about the oath? I know we've talked about his opinion of the oath, but has that come out?
No. I mean, maybe a little bit in season 3, right in the aftermath of his brother's death.
Right.
But not since then.
Right. Okay. Because that was another really interesting moment. Because, once again, it's the... As you say, it's the... I mean... It's the elephant in the room, right? Trying to deal with the Feanorians. And it's the thing that Fingon has to... He trusts Maedhros, but there's the oath. What can he do with the oath, right? And so to have Amras there as, not an intermediary, but as a sort of... not as an intermediary between the two of them, but as like an intermediary step between actually bringing that up and connecting with Maedhros about that. It was really interesting and sort of appropriately shocking to hear him expressing his hatred of the oath, that no one hates the oath more than he does, right? So as I said, that the Amras Fingon scene was really just one of my favorite from the entire episode. I thought that was really, really powerful and fascinating, the kind of role that it played with Fingon, right? Because the impression that I got, and this is me sort of like, this is what it suggested to me rather than like what they were explicitly saying in dialogue. What it suggested to me is that it seemed to give Fingon a certain degree of hope, because when he encountered a Feanorian who hated the oath, right? It's like, where do the Feanorians stand? Like, he does not trust Curufin and Celegorm and stuff, right? But like, where can Maedhros stand? What is Maedhros' relationship to the oath? That's kind of the question that he has to be asking. He has to be wondering, right?
Can't really ask Maedhros that question.
Right. Right. Yeah, exactly. Because he couldn't even be sure how to take an answer to that question, if he did ask it.
Right. how truthful would Maedhros be
Yeah.
with himself, let alone with Fingon?
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Exactly. And because, I mean, and the other thing I think is that, sort of most simply put, he doesn't know how the oath works. Like, he has no first-hand experience of it, and little second-hand experience of it even, really, right? I mean, he's encountered Maedhros when he rescued him, right? And he had sworn the oath already at that time. But, you know, Maedhros had other things on his mind at that time. You know, he did. But, like, how has Maedhros changed since the oath? You know, there is a sense, everybody has a sense of the power of the oath and the inescapability of the oath. How much has it changed Maedhros? You know, like, right. What exactly is the effect of it? And so it seemed to me that the very idea that Amros was so, like, self-aware of it, you know, that he could be both simultaneously bound to the oath and yet seeing the evil of the oath, rejecting it as evil, dislike, you know, and hating it. That seemed to be the impression I was getting, was that was kind of stretching Fingon's categories, and he didn't even realize that was, you know, that was a possibility, and that seemed to open for him the possibility that maybe Maedhros isn't playing me, right? You know, maybe he too is actually trying to resist the oath instead of, you know, somehow making me a pawn in his game there. Anyway, so that's what it was, both fun, objectively speaking, to hear Amros talk again, right, and to get some you know, Amros perspective on what's going on with him, but that we not only got that revelation, but that revelation played that really pivotal turning point, you know, for Fingon, seemed to me that was, that's what I really admired about it. Yeah. 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 What are other things that you guys were sort of wrestling with when you were handling the reunion? Not the union, but just the reunion of Maedhros and Fingon there. I mean, it seems to me that one of the real challenges is both to show the real connection between the two of them, and yet the clear strain, right? That would have to be, or, you know, and the sort of suspicion that would have to be. What were some of the things that you guys were kind of thinking about, and how were you kind of setting out to sort of manage that? It's funny, one of the things that I notice with the two of you collaborating on the episode is that both of you are deferring to the other one more. Like, if either one of you had written this episode alone, you'd be jumping right in talking about it.
Well, I mean, you know, there was, I remember we talked a lot about, like, Fingon as High King,
Mm-hmm.
and how Maedhros would kind of acknowledge in his behavior, at least, that position, and so on. That would be a tricky thing to start. So the opening scene sort of sets that up, that he's you know, Fingon's in a new position now that he wasn't in before,
Right.
and we want to show that Maedhros accepts that,
Right.
so that was part of it, and that's the re-establishing their ancient friendship. But it's not a straightforward thing, because they've been apart for a long time, and, you know, stuff's happened.
Right. A lot has happened.
Yeah, so the general idea was then, if the conflict of the episode's not going to be, is Maedhros going to accept Fingon as High King, or is he here to challenge for the throne or something like that? that wasn't going to be the challenge of the episode.
Right.
So the conflict had to come in how these two navigated this process, and we didn't want to make it simply, well, is Fingon going to join or isn't he?
Right.
Because that would be a little bit difficult to show, difficult to do very much with that. And it would seem like Maedhros shows up and says, hey, I have a plan. And Fingon's like, great, I want to be part of your plan. And then joins the plan. Like, there wouldn't be a lot to it. So we decided that it was more important to focus on the friendship and the question of, can they reestablish a friendship after so long?
Right.
Like, yes, they were friends long ago, but given everything that has happened,
right,
can they still be friends?
Right. Yeah.
And
no, I thought it was really interesting. I kept expecting, especially the way that, we had those conversations with Elrond and Rogrin and those at the beginning of the episode, right? That kind of led me to expect that it was going to become a sort of political thing, right? That we were going to end up with or not necessarily end up with, but that a major point along the way is going to be perhaps Fingon talking with his captains and being like, so what do you think? And some of them being for and some of them being against, right? And that sort of thing. Or it was going to be, or, maybe that, and then leading up to, again, speeches and almost, if I had to guess before reading the script, I would have guessed that the culmination of this episode would have been something that was going to be kind of parallel to the scene with Fingon and Celgorm and Curufin, right? Confronting each other in front of all of the people, right? Except turning out differently, obviously, right? A kind of reversal of that. That's probably what I would have guessed before I'd read it. Because it doesn't go in either one of those directions, or those aren't different directions. Those could have been a cumulative, kind of building. But instead, yes, like the other, captain, he had conversations. He had the private conversation with Rogrin about attacking Angband, and he had, it was was it Amras or Maedhros who had the conversation with Elrond?
They're both there.
They're both.
That's a dinner time conversation.
A dinner conversation, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So anyway, so they're involved, but it doesn't go in that direction, right? Instead, it stays focused just on the two of them and their relationship. And I really, again, that was, it's not what I would have guessed. It was in that sense, contrary to my expectations, but I really liked that. I really liked how that came down.
So this is where I have to let you know that it's your fault.
It's my fault
that it ends this way.
Okay.
Because during the script discussion, we surely did come up with a scene more or less as you just described to end the episode. So that was the original plan. And then during the Asanwe Kenta conversation, you specifically were like, wouldn't it be cool if this was relevant to the relationship between Fingon and Maedhros? And since the point of the episode is, can they be friends again? That had to be part of the final scene now.
See, this is awesome. This is the second best thing about getting old. The best thing about getting old is that I can read books that I've read before and have the experience of reading them for the first time. That's the best thing about getting old. I would have been excited to get old if somebody had told me that happened, right? But it's great. So in the Mythgard Academy right now, we're discussing The Name of the Rose by Umberto Eco, and I'm reading it. It's like I've never read this book before.
I'm having the same experience, Corey, with The Name of the Rose.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So anyway, so it's hard to compete with that as a benefit of getting old. That's the best thing about getting old. But the second best thing about getting old is retaining almost no memory of things that I've said before. I remember being taught once a very important lesson, which is that humility is manifested not by thinking little of your own abilities, but by thinking no more of the things that you have done or suggested than you would of something somebody else has done or suggested, which means also being able to take equal delight in good work that you do as you would in good work that other people do. And I always kind of struggled with that, like, oh, am I being too proud or anything? But now that I'm old, I do it automatically. Like, I can't even help it. So, like, I encounter something, I'm like, that's a genius idea. And you're like, it's your idea. And I'm like, well, great. Wow, what a good idea that was. I don't even remember having it. So it's like...
It also creates that nice kind of bookending of the episode where we start with the end with the two of them.
Yeah, loved it.
So, and that was the thing, is the whole point of the story was about their friendship. And I recognized that would be a more powerful ending than the coming before the court and making the decision, which was plot-wise what needs to happen here, right? Yeah. Like, obviously, Fingon needs to agree to this plan and sign on to it and make choices. But presumably he does.
Right.
Once they're friends,
right.
What's going to stop Fingon from doing this? Nothing. So
right. And we have every reason to believe, from what we've seen of his relationship with his captains and stuff, that they're going to go along with him, right? Once he is won over and once he is able to, because again, like, that's exactly the thing, right? Once he reestablishes this bond of trust with Maedhros, right? He already has that bond of trust with his captains, right? So he can just say to them, and they can just believe him, right? They'll just, they'll just be able to trust. So I think that works really, really well.
The scene that you were describing initially there that feels very much more like a Captain Picard style of leadership. Whereas I like that this gives Fingon a much more Captain Kirk style of leadership, much more direct, much more. You do the things that I say. There's no expectation that everybody's going to get their input in the situation. So I love that. You kind of get the feeling right off the bat that these two guys, all things being equal, in their heart of hearts, would love to just be best friends. It's just that all of this other stuff has gotten in the way. And the scene that exists now, with the opening up of the mind through Asana Kenta, allows them to be that, even if it's kind of fleeting, because they're not always going to be connected in that way. But for now, they are Fingon and Maedhros, and they're unstoppable.
My favorite moment was one of the earliest ones. The ones when the one when Fingon is like, don't give me that look, and he's like, what look? And he's like, that look that you get when somebody else is making your argument for you. Like, I loved that moment, especially coming after the previous scenes with Maedhros and his brothers, right? When we saw him not only asserting authority over them, but we saw him manipulating them and outmaneuvering, Kurufin and everything else, right? And then he gets to, Fingon, and Fingon is like, stop it.
And that's what I wanted to show, is that Fingon throws him off his game immediately, because he can't do that here.
Yeah.
He knows him too well.
Yeah, it's just that approach is not going to work. He cannot manage and manipulate and direct Fingon the way he can.
Well, he could, because Fingon recognizes that he's doing it now, right?
Right.
But but Fingon is wise to his game, so it's like that one person that when you're playing Monopoly with them, you don't make any deals with that person, because you know that whatever the deal is, no matter how good it sounds, it's definitely weighted in their favor, and you can't, you just can't do it.
Yeah. But no, that was it was such a charming moment of recollection, right? Even in the midst of when at that moment Fingon is still maximally uncertain like who this person is, right? That he's welcoming, because they met, right? Like at the Dagor Aglareb, they met basically
Multiple
like
times.
they've
There's been
encountered each
other
other.
meetings.
Yeah,
Yeah.
So it's not like he's never seen him again, but since he rescued him, but they've not really spent serious time together, and it's always anyway. But
There's almost always been that official capacity
Yes.
involved, and this is certainly the first time since the Dagor Bragollach,
right.
or even 10 years before that. So it's been 20 years since they've been in the same room, at least, and much longer since they were actually friends.
Right. Yeah.
And Maedhros has come back to Mithrim for the first time.
Right.
Yeah, and this is the first time that he's been there.
Yes. I did love the symbolism of the palace location, right? Halfway between the north and the south camps. Yeah.
We had a long discussion about that, didn't we?
Yeah.
We did.
It was nice. So this is like what, the High King's summer palace? Is that like, sort of what this is?
Kind of. This
It's-
is not the fortress at Beredaethel that overlooks the plain. This is just a place he can live when he's not on the front lines.
But I like that it's now at least moderately defensible. Like, it's not like Beredaethel. Beredaethel
Right.
is like this completely, like, you could take it with enough numbers, but it's easier to just go around,
Right.
as we've illustrated.
Yeah. Right. But it is at least, it's at the end of the day, it's still an island, right? So it's, it's defensible. No, so, okay. Yeah, no, that was a really fun element. Also, the fact, like, the quietness of their arrival, right? Just like the two travelers being ferried in by themselves, right? Was also very, of course it led to the surprise, like, oh, who are our guests? Oh, look, two of the sons of Fëanor by themselves, right? Have shown up on our doorstep. But that's, I think, clearly a cunning move by Maedhros to sort of set him at his ease.
Well, also, while their movements are never really going to be secrets against Morgoth, Maedhros is at least making an attempt not to advertise every single move he makes.
Yeah. One of the risks, I suppose, of placing so much emphasis in the episode on their personal relationship is that the military situation gets put in second place, right? And on the one hand, we get the conversation, which was really kind of funny, right? When like basically when they establish the fact that when Maedhros is like, yeah, your army is big, and he's like, yeah, I think not as big as yours, right? And then they're talking about Nargothrond, and they're like, yeah, Nargothrond's army is much bigger than mine, right? Can we get that? No, we're not going to be able to get them, right? How about Thingol? Like, his realm is the greatest realm in all of Beleriand, right? But we're totally not going to be able to get him, right? So, they kind of go through and they're like, all right, so we're going to do this with the third and fourth biggest armies in all of Beleriand, right? Their initial discussion, their initial discussion about, like, why I did like the fact that in that very first discussion, Fingon said all the things that, like, he would have to have said, right? Such as, why are you proposing this now when you refused to go along with my father when he suggested this exact same plan back before so many of us were killed? You can't argue that we're stronger now than we were. Anyway, so it was really good to kind of get that out on the table. But again, after that, we never kind of come back around. So, I mean, the risk is that I guess their final toast sort of suggests that they're both foolhardy and reckless, right? And so we certainly still have a lot of work to do in convincing the viewers that there's a good chance of success, right?
Right. So the trick is the battle's not happening till the end of the season.
Right. There's
So
still time.
we really have to not tell everybody up front what to expect. And there is a danger that we're telling them not enough, because this is episode 4. Like, it's possible that they maybe needed a little bit more by now. But we're going to have a whole council summit meeting where they get to go over the plan and be like, how are we dealing with this? How are we dealing with this? And that's where some of the answers to those questions should come up in episodes 6 and 7.
Right.
Specifically things like, things have changed for us, but also for Morgoth. So in this episode, the only piece that comes out is that Morgoth has changed.
Right.
Personally. So if we were going to focus on Fingon and Maedhros personally, Morgoth's personal weakness compared to how he was in the past seemed the right piece to put on the table. But there are other pieces that play into it, especially the deployment of the forces not all being concentrated in Angband anymore.
Right.
Morgoth spread much thinner than he was 20 years ago.
Right.
So there could be more references to that if you think it's too light on the what is your actual plan here, you guys?
I think it's okay. So one of the most cunning ways that you guys pointed at this, I felt, was the frequent references to Maedhros' maiming. Because of course Maedhros himself becomes a kind of symbol of his whole proposal, right? He is going to challenge Morgoth, and like that, basically the Noldor, the elves attacking Thangorodrim now after so many of them have been killed, after they've after they as a people, after the Leaguer has been crippled, right, is like Maedhros now going into battle with one hand. They have been weakened just as he has been weakened, physically weakened by losing his right hand. But he has learned to fight with his left hand. Yeah, exactly. So he is like he with his left hand is a fun sort of symbol, to kind of a representative symbol. And there were moments when it looked like, again, it was I thought, like, really subtly done. Like, it wasn't like it didn't scream out at me or anything, but where it looked like, Fingon was like making that parallel, even kind of perceiving the strength of his friend.
Part of the reason that's in here is that Fingon's the one who cut off Maedhros' hand. And this is the part of their baggage and history.
Right.
So, obviously the audience is well aware that Maedhros only has one hand. But I just wanted to make sure that the script called attention to it so that it would be very visible and present in the mind of the viewer, because for Fingon, that's a strong reminder.
It's going to be very present in his mind. Yeah.
Right. So since this whole episode's being told from Fingon's perspective, that's why that's there. But it also very much correlated to their discussions, and when I forget what word. It's Fingon who uses it, though, something about like fighting either crippled or hobbled or something like that.
Yes.
And then Maedhros is like, I'm really good at fighting with this left hand.
I know something about that. Yeah.
But so that's how Fingon is thinking.
Yeah.
In the background.
No, I thought that was really fun. And I was thinking the same thing about Fingon's attention to the stump, right? I mean, that he's going to be, because I mean, what a tangle of mixed feelings Fingon will have about that, right?
Maedhros is begging for Fingon to kill him at that point.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So no, I thought that was really good. So I don't think that there necessarily needs to be more on the military side. I think the only risk, the only thing that I think would be bad would be if people emerge from this episode taking the foolhardy comments to heart too much, right? I mean, if anyone were to watch this episode and really take away, oh man, there's no way this is going to work, right? Like, but they both want to do this, but this will never work. Conceivably, they could do, to the extent that when they're pitching it later on, the audience might be resistant to their, like, think that they're like, it's like, oh, they don't even believe this. They're just putting on a show for everybody else, right? To try to convince them. And that isn't how we would want them to think. We would want them to be convinced and to believe that Fingon and Maedhros certainly believe this, and be at least willing to entertain the possibility themselves that it might actually be true, right?
Yeah, so one way to mitigate without actually putting anything else on the table would be when they're discussing what armies they can get.
Yeah.
If the beginning of that conversation, because you're joining in the middle, right?
Right.
So if the beginning of that conversation made it clear that they'd already had a discussion of how they were going to do this, and now they're just seeing if they can get the numbers to do the plan that they just talked about.
Right.
So if there was some indication that there was a plan and it's on the table and it sounds like it could work.
Yeah.
And then they go into who can we get?
Because if it's a matter of numbers, that's not going to get resolved until Galadriel shows up.
Yeah. No, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. No, that's certainly true. But yeah, actually because you're right, that's one of the things that I felt anyway to be completely absent, or felt completely absent, is any indication that a plan exists, right? A conviction was clear, right?
Right, but where's the plan?
Right, and that Maedhros really believed in it, but there was, but even just to say, like, as you say, we're joining that episode, that conversation in the middle. So, if it begins with something like,
if the table is cleared off and there's little things stuck around it, and they're like, so this is here and this is here.
Well, and he just
shaker battle plan.
Right, exactly. And if Fingon's first words are something like, your plan is sound, but, and then they, go on to talk about the armies and stuff. Just, we don't even know what the plan is yet. We just,
right. But
it would be good to know that there is a plan.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
That probably would be a good edit.
Yeah. That makes sense. Yeah. I mean, there is something just kind of appealing to me to this. I mean, again, I didn't dislike or distrust the ending. Their, like, toast to their mutual foolhardiness, right, and their determination to be foolhardy together. I really loved that. But as I say, it seems like where we could lose people, or where people might get the wrong idea.
Right.
One could easily imagine that Maedhros is proceeding merely on, well, not exactly bravado, but, a kind of desperate courage. Like, we're doing this because it's the only thing we could do, and,
right.
It's less totally unlikely than it was before, maybe, if you think about it from a certain way. But again, not like, I've thought about this and I'm pretty sure this will work. That's not the impression that ending leaves by itself. But yeah. Anyway, cool. No, that's good. Well, so let's glance at the other union, Hurin and Morwen.
I do like that the story about the political union is very personal and intimate, and the story about the actual marriage
is very
is
political.
very much about a political union.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. It's that was kind of delightful, actually. And again, it wasn't really until the very ending, that like at the end of the day, both of them are decided by the same thing, right? Both of them are about the choice to trust and, the attempt to ascertain, but the decision to move forward, not just move forward blindly in trust, but to establish trust, right? To be willing to establish trust, which, so again, obviously the situation between them is quite different than between Fingon and Maedhros. So
the point is they don't know each other.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. But yeah, so anyway, the closeness of that parallel I thought was really fun. And the juxtaposition of the Osanwe Kenta interaction between Fingon and Maedhros with the betrothal basically of Hurin and Morwen. I thought that was a really powerful juxtaposition, basically. Both because you can see it really emphasizes, like, this is what they need, right? But of course, this is what they can't just do, right? If the two of them could open their minds to each, which of course is the big first question, are they willing to do that, right? They're both kind of making the choice to open themselves up in that way, but they can't just do it in the telepathic sense that Fingon and Maedhros can do it.
I just realized, because Maria and I wrote these scenes without consultation with each other. So we were working in parallel.
Yeah.
But I just realized I had the line in that scene of "you must let me in" and "you must let me in," and that was before you'd written the Osanwe scene.
I know.
I wrote that.
When I was looking, I was like, man, that's really good.
Yeah. The parallels are very strong in places because the honesty question is the same for both storylines, and the how can I trust what you're saying right now?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Except the answer has to be very different when you have humans who can't just read each other's minds.
Right. And yet that like the mechanism is not they don't have that mechanism available to them, but the decision is the same. The decision to open up, right? And Morwen especially, who is so guarded, right, and has been so guarded from. I'm thinking of the first time we met her, but even really just from the beginning of episode 1 of this season, right? The difference between her and. It's very handy that she always goes around with Rian, who is such a delightful contrast to her, right? And how she acts. That really draws our attention to it. But
this is the first time. I mean, we got a bit of her at Luthien and Beren's wedding, and so we got a sense of her attitude to being a refugee, essentially.
Yeah.
And so, but this is the first episode where she's like, we get her perspective.
Right.
On anything. So since then.
Yes. No, that was really interesting. I did like it was a funny scene with all the mothers and their daughters lining up to introduce themselves to Hurin.
It felt a little Rodgers and Hammerstein Cinderella to me. I'm not gonna lie, but I was like, okay, all right, this is what we asked for,
Don't have a lot of humor in this series.
Yeah. No, I liked it. I mean, it wasn't like
discussed it.
It wasn't farcical, but yeah, I mean, that's the thing that I liked about it was Hurin's own cluelessness, right? As he's looking around, he's like, man, there are a lot of girls coming to offer their service. Like, that's admirable and everything, but I don't really know what to do here. And, his mom being like, dude. Yeah.
His cluelessness being established up front was really important because he obviously is going to make some mistakes and missteps in this episode, and it was really good to see that there was nothing mean-spirited about that.
Right.
Like, he wasn't...
He's willing to find a wife, once it was put to him.
Right, he's like, they told me to do this, I'm just doing the thing they told me to do. So unlike a character who is callous because they're very proud and full of themselves,
right.
He comes across as very honest in his bumbling.
Right. No, I did like that. I mean, and it's like the situation where he's like, oh, I'm sorry, I assumed you were lining up to marry me like everyone else, and I was going to make your day by saying that I would marry you, right? Like, it's, I mean, like, I found that sort of, I mean, like, it's clueless, but sort of endearingly clueless, right? You can see how there's almost for him, not quite a kind of betrayal, but almost feels like a betrayal, right? Maria, just like you said, he's like, look, first I'm being pressured that I've got to pick a woman to marry, and then I do it, and then I get in trouble for it, right? Like, what, seriously, like, yeah.
I'm glad that's your response, because I was having a very hard time trying to erase Darcy and Elizabeth Bennet.
Right, yes.
Like, ad proposal where he comes across as quite haughty in the proposal to her, and I wanted Hurin to come across to Morwen as if he's patronizing her, but he's really not intending to patronize her.
Right, exactly. No, I mean, it had he gone a step or two further in being like, besides, it's very generous of me to elevate your refugee people out of the dirt and get, like, he kind of, like, he goes close.
That way, but it's not what he was intending.
Right, exactly. Yeah, no, I mean, I'm thinking of the Mr. Darcy parallel, right? I mean, like, he doesn't actually go so far as to be like, did you expect me to rejoice in your low connections? Like, he's nothing like as bad as Mr. Darcy at proposing the first time. So yeah, no, it's, because, I mean, that's sort of an obvious template for a bad proposal, but we don't want him, well, first of all, we don't have time to recuperate his character as Jane Austen does, right, over the course of the second half of Pride and Prejudice. So
we already know him anyway. I mean, he's established, he's the through character of this season, and we know him to be a nice guy,
right,
and compassionate and thoughtful, but perhaps a bit kind of like trying to do the right thing, and but also like he's driven by a sense of purpose as well, for the war, and that's what's on his mind, almost.
I kept coming back to there's a scene in the second Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movie where his landlord comes to him. I think it's the second one, it might be the third. His landlord comes to him and gives him advice on how to win MJ over. He says, you go to her, you say, you're a good woman, I'm a good man. Like, as if that were all that one need do.
Yeah.
And that was kind of the, how I was thinking that he would approach this situation. Like this is the most sense-making thing possible, right? Like, you're clearly the one for every possible reason that I can think of, and of course the one I'm thinking of the most is the one that sticks in my mind the most when I'm in your presence right now, and so that's the one I spend the most time talking about, and unfortunately that's not the one that she's interested in hearing about.
Right.
Yeah,
that was one of the things let's talk a little bit more about her reaction. in particular of what primarily motivates her to say no. Like there's what she says and there's what she's thinking, which are not completely overlapping, right? Not that she lies or misrepresents, but anyway, like I don't think she fully understands everything herself, right? So
she is young still. I mean,
she's young.
And she's very closed.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
She
she lets him stumble through this entire proposal and just silently listens to it and doesn't give him anything, which isn't helping matters.
Right.
Right. So a couple of other characters are going to say to her, "You're not actually that easy,"
Right.
to know. And
Right.
I think, just in case, people think it's just us. It's actually the people she's interacting with, the people who know her, know that she's closed, and that there's more to her underneath, though.
Right.
She could get out.
So the reasons of the reasons that she seemed to be motivated by in her discomfort and refusal, the one that I found least compelling. The one I found least compelling of her reasons was like the being an ornament objection. Right. It's not that I don't find that at all appropriate, but I was kind of trying to back up and say, all right, what do I think Morwen's big problems would be? No, wait. Let me back up a step behind that. What does Morwen want? Right? Like, what is Morwen hoping for? Such that she would be not getting it right from Hurin in his first proposal. And I wasn't really sure. Like, I'm wanting to make sure, because again, we've not interacted with her much.
I think the deal is that she's not in the same position he is. He's been told, hey, you need to go get married. Like, get on that, buddy.
Right.
And she's old enough to be thinking about such things, but no one's been in her ear saying, hey, are you going to settle down? Are you going to pick somebody?
That she's the most beautiful woman according to other people around her. She's been told this before. She sees the way boys look at her, have done for years and years. So this is the position I was putting her in.
Right.
She's a girl who has spent her whole life recognizing the male gaze on her.
Right.
And so here's somebody who this is not news to her that he finds her the most beautiful woman. This is something she knows. People have that response to her.
Yes.
So she's looking for something more than that as an opening game, and that's what he starts with.
Right.
You're the most beautiful woman. This is perfect, and he's never spoken to her before.
Right.
He may have seen him looking at her, but all the boys look at her like that,
And this is not a problem I have, right? I've had many perfectly normal interactions with guys my whole life because that's not a problem. But I've had friends who are drop dead gorgeous, and watching teenage or college age boys stumble over themselves trying to interact with my friend was like, oh my goodness, this is a whole other world. And she was the nicest person, so she was kind and gracious and let them down so easily and had pat answers for everything. So this was somebody that, when she was 19 had to say, oh, I don't date people I work with to her coworkers.
Right.
Because she always would get hit on by coworkers.
I mean, Morwen's going to say, I think, to Emildir, like, every boy wants to ask me to marry them. I know that.
Right. So she's used to the no thank you as her immediate response. That's her go-to when she gets catcalled.
Morwen, I think, doesn't even need to get as far as no thank you. I think she just has absolutely mastered the icy stare of death.
Yeah, she's unapproachable.
Yeah.
I mean,
That's true.
So the fact that, Hurin's come and approached her, that was a good start. But he opens with the cliche.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that just puts her off from the start. And I think that's why she goes with, you just want me to adorn your,
Right.
like stand.
Right. No, I mean, that all makes a lot of sense. And I do agree, like, it is really important. It is important to remember, as you say, like, we know Morwen is the most beautiful of human women. And there, as you say, there are side effects of being the most beautiful of mortal women. Here's the thing that I was wanting to kind of integrate with it more, or thinking about how it would impact her, because Morwen has had especially among her people, right? She's not just a random, really beautiful girl.
No, that's right.
She is, and all of her people know that she is being groomed to be the matriarch of their clan, right? And I would think that she would probably only have been on the receiving end of a comparatively small fraction of the amorous attention that she would have received had she not always been at the side of Emeldir, right? Who even people outside people don't mess with Morwen as it is, right? Nobody's going to mess with Emeldir, right? So, again, not that she, as you say, she sees their gaze, like even if they're too scared to approach her or whatever. But I would think, like, basically, the thing that the element that I felt, I don't know if it's fair to say that it was missing. The element that I kind of wanted to wrestle with more was her sense of her position. Basically, that it would not just be I want you to respect me for myself, but also are you even I'm not just a random pretty girl, right? Like that, even it's not, that's not just,
I kind of put that in there, but I may have edited some of that dialogue out. I can put it back in. That side of his proposal where he's like, where he uses the inappropriate word raise.
Right.
The house of Dale.
Raise that.
And her response is that's where she kind of throws that back in his face. But I could do more with that. And
I'm thinking even in the conversation with Emeldir and Hareth afterwards, I think it could sort of come up more. I mean, it's there. Emeldir talks with her about that as, basically, one of the sort of pressures that the older women put on her in that conversation is, it's time for you to lead. And this is a smart move. As leader of the house of Beor, this is a smart move, right? For the sake of
it.
Yeah, and exactly, and she sees it. But at the same time, she would have to see that it's risky. In some ways, the whole, raising of the house of Beor could happen, right? But it could also be the subsuming of the house of Beor into the... And we were already seeing that tension, right? With Emeldir and Morwen in the earlier episode being like, we have to, she's like, why are we here? And who cares about the horse race, right? And Emeldir's like, we have to, follow the ways of these new people and stuff, right? So, yeah, I'm wondering if it's...
I can put I've got some ideas of how to expand that discussion in the scene with Emeldir and Hareth.
Right. Yeah.
That would do that.
Yeah. That if, it makes all kinds of sense for her to respond to him when she's rejecting him, to respond to him with those two kind of prickly points, right? The don't start with the I'm pretty, right, part. And second, the raising of the house, those two points make all kinds for that to be the focal point of her immediate reaction to him, right? But in the contemplation later, like
she can be worried about subsuming, I think is a good word there. Like in the risk in the Union is that the House of Bear gets subsumed, and it could be put back on her. Well, that's your role to make sure it's not. That's
right. In which case, is it putting her in an? I mean, because there's one way of looking at this, which would say Hurin is the worst man for her to marry, right? Because then she's going to be House of Hador all day long, right? At least, again, everyone else is going to look at it that way.
Yeah, right? She's going to end up being House of Hador all day long after the Near Night.
Yes, so, exactly. Exactly.
So she does need to have that. And in the next coming episodes, like, it's all very well, what I was thinking about this, it's all very well for them to talk about, and Hurin to talk about, yes, we can learn to be rulers together and that sort of thing. But it's not actually going to pan out initially in that way, because he's just going to convert to type, and she's not going to be let in as like when she says you must let me in, she's not meaning the same thing as what he means.
Right.
She's meaning like I want to be an equal partner in rulership sort of side of things.
Right.
And he's like, I want to understand you better as a person.
Right.
That's.
Right, exactly. And it's that's exactly the thing I wanted to hear more about. I get no impression that he has any interest in letting me, like, if I'm going to rule, I'm going to rule. Like, I'm going to rule by his side. And it's sort of adjacent to the whole he sees me as an ornament thing. Like, the he sees me as an ornament is a bad omen for the the rulership question.
But she has to be reassured enough by the end of this to say yes. So
yes.
I remember thinking about this. I didn't want to tip the hand too much in this episode that Hurin wasn't in fact like that they were in fact misunderstanding each other. It's going to turn out that they were, and they're going to have to talk about that in future episodes and work through this, because they don't know each other. Work this through. But so I think, Hurin is genuine in wanting to get to know her as a person and to understand her. I sort of figured he just lost his father.
Yes.
His father, who said in, what was it, episode 2 or 3, you have no idea what war means. And now he's, he goes out and he loses his father. And he's sort of feel, we've reached the end of an invented, official period of mourning at the start of the episode.
Yes.
So I'm sort of starting Hurin, and, he's still kind of grappling with loss from war and so on. So he's not as quite gung-ho as he was.
Yes.
And wants to understand grief better, and she's so there's a genuineness there. But he doesn't. But the idea that she's expecting to be an equal ruler with him is just going straight over his head.
Exactly. And that is definitely.
I don't want to tip the hand too much, because otherwise,
right, it's going to become an issue later. And I see that. But I guess that's exactly the thing that I think I did want a little bit more of, is that her. Yes, she's going to want to like him to care about her as a person and not just as a sexual object, right? Clearly. But that's like a very small first step, right? For her, I would think, especially given both her like lifelong training with Emeldir, and also her awareness of their delicate position as refugees, right, in this new land, both of those are going to lead her to be more than otherwise she would be sensitive to, I don't just need him to respect me as a person, to respect me as an intelligent human being rather than just a sexual object, but I want him to respect me as a peer, right? He's the Lord of the House of Hador. I am the ruler of the House of Beor. This should be, if we're going to get married, our marriage will be an alliance of equals, right? An equal alliance of equals. Is that That's not how he's thinking. In as much as
No.
he is thinking her as part of the queue of young women, right, with their mothers lining up to be noticed, he is not at all thinking. He's thinking in the opposite way that she would want him
Yeah,
to be
but he
thinking.
can't say anything that tips her off to that
Right.
because
Right.
that's-
Part of the issue is that if she is very clear to Emeldir and Harith what she's looking for
Right.
Mm.
in a husband, and then has this conversation with him where they're going to get engaged, he has no clue that that's what's really on the table. So what would he say that would reassure her
Mm.
that that's what it's going to look like?
So he's talking. So I mean, he's talking about like them being able to, the idea that Morwen's a young woman now. The male children who also refugeed are young men now,
Right.
and so there is a generation of young men of the House of Baor who are joining the army,
Right.
and doing the Hadorian things and so on. So there's already a kind of integration going on
Mm-hmm.
here.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I think we can talk about the concerns, but in terms of the whole story, there is never going to be a House of Baor anymore.
Right.
Because there's not even going to be a House of Hador anymore, really. There's
Right.
going to be a bunch of refugees in the havens of Sirion at some point, That's where we're headed. Who will go to Numenor. And they do pay attention a bit to ancestry. We see that in, the Eldarion and Arendis story, where
Yes.
Arendis was Baorian. So they don't forget it completely. But I think that the big cultural differences that were set up when
Yes.
humans came to the scene, that's kind of, at least for Hador and Baor, starting to break down, I
Yes.
think.
Yeah.
Yes.
So if I were to kind of get into Hurin's head here and imagine what his expectations are here, because his expectation is that she would make a great lady of the House of Hador.
Right.
And what that means, right, that means the replacement for his mom. Culturally speaking, not like she's going to become his mother in a weird Freudian sense, but
No. Yeah. Or not any more weirdly Freudian than it ever is, but go ahead.
Right. Fair enough. So he is imagining her fulfilling the role of the Lady of the House of Hador,
Yes.
of running the household, and she seems like a person who would be great at that.
Yeah.
She seems to have a lot of admirable leadership qualities, which would become necessary for the Lady of the House of Hador to have.
It's nice
Mom's
that we
not-
even see Harith exerting some of those leadership abilities.
Yeah.
Right.
She's not, but yeah, she does stuff, Harry.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Right. And so that's kind of his expectation. And maybe even, quiet moments of counsel, like the ones that Thingol might enjoy if he, paid attention for 14 seconds.
Mhm.
That sort of thing.
Right.
Not that they would be co-equal in any kind of meaningful way.
Right.
And ultimately, of course, she's not going to share all of his leadership duties.
Right.
That is clearly never going to happen. And I don't think that she's looking for that either.
But in the end, she's not going to be the confidant she's expecting to be in terms of his decision making. He's going to be
Yes.
turning to his brother for that.
Right.
Mhm.
Right. And sure, she probably has a voice if she brings it to his attention, especially about stuff that isn't, the province of men and that sort of thing. But,
Right. Right.
um,
But no, it's a legitimate cultural difference between the Hadorians and the Baorians.
Yeah. And at this point in the story, it's there still. So
Yes. Yes.
I agree. I think I can revise some of that to bring up Morwen's what Morwen wants in a partnership with another leader kind of thing in that conversation. But I'm wary about bringing it up in the interactions between Hurin and Morwen.
Yes. I hear that because you don't want to spoil what is still yet to come. Because if it comes out explicitly, then he already knows. And if he screws this up later on.
Huor sees it.
Right.
Huor says something like that to
Yes.
Hurin.
Right.
Like she's being groomed for the leadership
Yes. Yeah.
at the bow. He tells Hurin that. But
Yes.
Hurin doesn't, it's not kind of, he doesn't get what it is. I think Hua probably does get.
Right. And again, that also, I will say, I found, I was very willing to accept, especially because Hurin has been our sort of point of view character through the season so far. So I was sort of predisposed to kind of think about things from his perspective, right? And the emphasis in the last couple episodes has been all about Hurin figuring out what it means to become the leader of his people, and now especially with his father's death, being suddenly burdened by all of these responsibilities and thinking about what he's supposed to do. So there's a sense in which, of course, under the circumstances, being still very young, now the lord of his people, unexpectedly, right, with very insufficient, as it has turned out, grooming from his father, as his mother points out, right, he is a little bit selfish. He is a little bit, blind to other people's perspective. Huor's not, right? Because Huor's not in that place, right? Huor's not having to think about these things, and right, Huor's just standing watching the whole thing from a distance, and so he sees it much more clearly than Hurin does. Because of course Hurin can be forgiven for thinking first and foremost about what the Lord of the House of Hador has to be doing and what that life is going to be.
Credit, when he comes back to Morwen in the last scene, he openly acknowledges that that's what happened, and so he's still like our number one guy.
Right. Yeah. No, I like that. I mean, I did feel that the whole exchange really succeeded in what seemed one of the really crucial points, and that is not losing our sympathy for either character, right? That's the trickiest thing about that kind of an interaction, right? Not to make Hurin look like too much of a jerk or an idiot, and not making Morwen look simply cold and unsympathetic, right? Either one of those things can happen in a scene like that, and I felt that both of those were very strongly avoided.
Again, the Pride and Prejudice parallel. We do not have the screen time or the space to allow someone to look like that.
Yes.
And then have to undo it and walk it back.
Yeah.
But I think we've already, like the setup of Morwen in the previous season, in the one scene, the scenes where we did have a speaking role, already hopefully set people up to see that she's, there's a reason she is like she is.
Yes.
And it's a different response to trauma than Rian.
Yes.
So these are both sort of trauma responses.
Yes.
Their personality. And so we're playing with that. This season.
Yeah, no, I thought that was good. And I will also say, even though I was kind of thinking and wondering about a bunch of these scenes, I still found the engagement scene at the end quite touching. Like yes, I am prepared for that to be like almost a little bit undermined, as you said, like with the sort of cross purposes, like they're not, they're saying, sort of beautiful things to each other, but not really fully understanding what it is that the other one is saying exactly, which sort of strikes me as something that's generally true when people get married. But yeah, no, I did find that passage, that passage beautiful. The whole end of the episode between that and the Asan Makenta scene, we're both very emotional.
Yeah, we're gonna tell a story about these people's lives through a long arc.
Mm-hmm.
Like a lot of stories that focus on people getting married end with a wedding.
Right.
Yeah.
Like once they get married, all right, you made your choices.
Right.
Have fun, live your life.
Right.
Like we're gonna tell that life. And so like the very next episode will be how do newly married people who don't know each other very well figure this out and
Right.
navigate these new circumstances? So we will journey with them through becoming parents and experiencing loss and navigating the co-leadership situation. Like, we're gonna see them.
Pretty dark. And eventually we're actually going to get to some scenes where there's dialogue that Tolkien wrote.
Yeah.
Eventually.
It will return again. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
It will.
Yeah, it will. But yeah, no, I mean, and there's going to be, but this is one of those places where I find Hurin and Morwen's relationship is a really fascinating one. I mean, it's a really complicated kind of marriage, and I am really delighted at the chance to kind of take this kind of time with it and think it through, and to think through, Ilana, I think back to you.
Been one of my favorite characters.
Yeah, well, exactly. I was going to say, I think back to your Osmoot paper about Morwen and the kind of emotional complexity of her character and her entire life, from beginning to end, which so often gets underplayed and underrespected, as you've argued, even by the narrator, right?
The narrator. I mean, Tolkien wrote what he wrote, so it's
Right.
there.
Right.
Like,
Right.
That's. I mean, but I think because the story is so heavily slanted on Turin,
Yes.
then you lose Morwen's perspective, but actually it is there in the text.
Right. Right. Yeah. The evidence of it is there. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. One of the very fun things about the Silmarillion is the narrative voice having a very specific slant and skew to everything we're told.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, it's Dear Harville's fault. That's who I.
Right. Right. Exactly. Which will be really fun to introduce his character later on as well. Yeah, when we get to the Havens of Sirion. Yeah. Yep. Okay. So let's talk briefly about the brief sea plot, Galadriel and Galadriel, which contained such a delightful amount of poetry. That was very.
That would be me.
Yeah.
And Marie pulling me up, but this prose part has to scan as well.
Right.
Okay, I'll make it scan.
It's it's tricky when you include Tom Bombadil. Like, it's you're biting off a lot when you include Tom Bombadil.
I also had a bit of Galadriel as well.
Yes. I loved the anticipation of I sang of trees of gold. That was fun, and that also scanned beautiful iambic heptameter. That did scan really well also. Yeah, no, that was fun.
I sat there with the Tom Bombadil chapters. Like, okay, what can I do?
Yes. Yeah.
And in doing those two, like doing the Galadriel iambic and the whatever Tom Bombadil's meter is, both of them, English is just amazing for this. You can, not every language you can do this with, right?
Right. Yes, it's true. Yeah, no, that was a lot of fun. So I really liked their communing with the trees and figuring out that there's something that they're like, okay, these trees are old enough to remember us, but there's something wrong here, right?
They've gone into their shells.
Yeah,
trees.
and sort of not touching on that, right? By the way, I also really loved it. It was like a really deep Easter egg, right? That of course, the passage in the Old Forest chapter, which describes the hostility of the forest to all those who go on two legs for hacking, burning, everything else, and of course we're thinking of the hobbits, which is also perfectly true. Like, the hobbits hacked and burned and all that stuff, right? So it is relevant to the hobbits and the Bucklanders in particular, right? As according to the stories that Mary has just told. But then we see those trees already hostile because of all of the hacking and burning that the Empire of Bree is doing, right, as the city is being built. So just it seemed like a really, really fun sort of Easter egg to say, like, basically it's one of those things that kind of retroactively reinforms or recontextualizes a line from the Lord of the Rings, right? Where now when we get to that line in the Lord of the Rings, we'll be like, oh yeah, I know exactly what the Old Forest, like what set it off originally, right?
This is a different generation of trees to those ones,
Yeah.
So this is
yeah. Though young man Willow is still presumably probably there already, perhaps, but anyway, no, that's that was a really fun element there. I also really liked.
We've had a surprising amount of pushback on the possibility of trees magically just being really old.
Yeah, I was surprised by that too. People pointing out like how improbable it is that a tree would be that old, and I'm like,
this is Middle Earth after all.
I mean, it's like I understand what you mean that
of course.
Very few trees in our world normally grow that long, but this is the second age of Middle Earth we're talking about here, right? The elves are still fading, and anyway, it's the first age of Middle Earth.
We're in the first
We're
stage.
still in the first age of Middle Earth.
And that's part of the problem.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's fine.
There's 6,000 years before we get to the third age.
But that's the point, right? Like the decay and change of time is still only just starting to take effect in Middle Earth, right? There's lots of reasons actually to imagine that trees
there are many
from the first age.
There are many magical reasons why a tree could live that long.
Well, and not even just magical, but again, like the idea, like
willows are softwood.
Yes.
So, and they break easily in storms.
Right.
So, in real life, we are not going to find a 6,000-year-old willow tree.
No.
Like there is not one of those that exists.
No, certainly not.
So knowing, I think it's specifically because he's old man willow. It's not like a tree can't be 6,000 years old.
No, but we also
don't. A willow tree?
Know any willow trees that eat people. So I don't find
magical...
his prolonged age the most challenging thing to believe about him, frankly. So I mean, I mean, but again, like, I guess I approach that question totally from the other end, basically,
right?
And say like, okay, what do we think was in Yavanna's head when she made trees in the first place, right? Yeah. Do we think she designed trees to, just like wilt up and break down and perish every, 50 to 100 years if they're a willow or whatever it is? Like, no, like I think it's easy to imagine that, the modern life cycles of trees are a product of the fading and diminishment of Arda over time, right? So, especially since we're talking about the first age, to superimpose as some kind of prescriptive thing current conditions that we know in our world, and even forgetting the whole magic versus our world, primary and secondary world thing, even if we grant Tolkien's stubborn premise that Middle Earth is our world, right? Yeah. Still, to say that things in the first age, for crying out loud, or things that came from the first age, should be, should act the same way that they do here in, what are we in now? Seventh age, something like that. Anyway, like it just seems to me silly. Like, I can't see any justification for thinking that way.
That's fair enough. That's fair enough.
Yeah, there's always a question of what from the primary world you put in the secondary world and what rules carry over. Mm-hmm. And people have different assumptions about that.
Yeah.
That's really what it comes down to.
And this is why I still don't have any problem with Galadriel planting the party tree.
No. I'm fine with her planting a tree in the location of the party tree. That's just fine.
I will accept that.
That
because
was
we
my
won't
attitude
know.
as well.
we won't know whether or
We
not
wont
it's
know.
the same
Yeah,
tree.
we're not going to do
And
the
therefore, I
life
see
story
no
of the
reason
tree.
to-
Yeah, we don't have to settle it. But yeah. I mean, even a personal connection from Galadriel, right? Like even if we give a scene, you know, I mean, we get it indirectly with her comment to Sam, right? About I see that you have used my gift wisely, right? You know, that scene. But even if we were to self-indulgently add the scene that I would want to add, which is like Galadriel, like seeing where he planted the Malorn, because she's got to be curious, right? Like, so there was a Malorn seed in there. What did you do with it, right? Like, I'm keen to know, right? And you've got to think that Sam would be keen to show her, right, and tell her about the party tree and stuff. And so for her to be like, yeah. This works. You know, this works. I mean, come on, that would be great. Yeah. Sojourner says, "Can you say party tree frame narrative?" Yeah, let's have a frame story that focuses entirely on the party tree. Yes. Yeah, love it. Yeah. The narrative of the party tree over the centuries. That's what the frame has been missing. It's perfect. Perfect. Yeah. That's good.
Not in on writing that.
Yeah.
I think you would need to involve Sparrow in that project.
Yeah, probably. I think so. Yeah, I think so. Okay, so other things. Oh, about the encounter with Tom Bombadil. I really liked how you handled his evasiveness about like who he was and where he comes from. I also really liked how quickly Galadriel and Galadriel stop asking. Right? You know, after he answers, and you know, they're like, it's like they're kind of picking up what he's putting down, and they're like, okay, don't need to know anymore. We're good. Right? Like, I get enough of it now that I'm fine. No further questions, sir, about who you are.
They're not hobbits. They
Right.
are elves.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Little.
Right.
She only has to ask once, not twice, before she kind of starts figuring it out.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
Like
Galadriel has
She's with
met
Valinor.
the Valar and the Maiar.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
she's familiar with this sort of thing.
Yes.
And Melian.
And Melian,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was. I mean, I think they can kind of make their own judgments about it, and he's friendly and offering to help.
Yeah. One of the other things that I really liked about it is the way that they're. It was how you sort of establish him as like how to say that Tom Bombadil is a genius loci without saying he's a genius loci, right? You know, to have them coming in and being like, let us try to commune with this land, right? I'm not here. Do you hear the voice? I'm listening for its voice, but it's not talking to me, right? And then you hear the voice of Tom Bombadil, right? You know, coming out, and it's like, okay, now they're talking to the, now like it. In fact, it did hear them, right? You know, they were trying to communicate with the forest, right? The forest has heard them, and here it comes, hopping and skipping down the path to talk to them.
We didn't want Tom Bombadil to be getting them out of a pickle or
Right.
Something like that.
Right.
But, they're headed in the right direction anyway. But
Right.
This is an encounter.
Yeah. No, exactly. It is. It would be hard to contrive, a scene where Galadriel is in a place of distress from which Tom Bombadil has to rescue her. So I agree. The resistance of that parallel is a perfectly sensible one. And
but
yet
he was going that way anyway. That's a parallel, obviously.
Right. I also really liked how his
Mm-hmm.
making a path for them through the woods was like a gesture towards his helpfulness. Yeah, both his mastery and his it's the same kind of helpfulness that will lead him to rescue the hobbits later on. It's just a little bit less dramatic under these circumstances, right? But that's fine. It still shows that impulse. And in fact, he does assist them, right?
Right.
Though less
He's a
critically.
friendly guy,
Yeah.
and if people wander into his territory, he'll be friendly to them
Right.
to an extent, you know.
Right. Right.
You know, at the end, I put in the serious, you know, like, you know, are you sure you know what you're doing?
Right.
Like, you know,
Right.
essentially, you know, allying yourself with humans might not work out so well.
Right. Right. Yes,
Yeah.
there is a little that the hesitation there, right? That they don't know what they're gonna see, what they're gonna find. Yeah. Also, the other thing that I liked about the scene of him opening up the path is it really raised the sort of I use this phrase very cautiously about Tom Bombadil, the sense of moral ambiguity associated with him, right?
Yeah.
You know, there's nothing evil or corrupt about him, and yet this sketchy forest that won't talk to them obeys him, right?
Yeah.
Is that a bad sign? Is that a good sign? Right? I mean, and again, these are the same kind. My point is just these are the same kinds of questions that one does have reading the Tom Bombadil chapters. You know, like his relationship with Old Man Willow raises those questions. I think for readers.
Isn't that that Gandalf makes? Is it Gandalf? Like, you know, that everybody's dangerous.
Right.
You know, like
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
You know,
But I think that what you're terming as moral ambiguity, I would probably suggest more like an alignment ambiguity, not necessarily alignment in the D&D terms, though of course there's some applicability there, but he's not aligned with your
He's not
country
on
or your
anybody's
nation.
side. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
To I think an even more extreme degree than Treebeard.
And Treebeard, yeah.
Though
yeah.
Treebeard is the one who says it.
Yes. Right, because Treebeard's only not on anybody's side because nobody is on his side. If it is as soon as he begins to think that somebody might in fact be on his side, then he is totally on their side, right? So whereas Tom Bombadil doesn't play that
because
to
you
the same
can't
extent.
really be on Tom Bombadil's side, can you?
Right, yeah, it's a tough side to be on.
And the whole point is that he's the master of his own land.
Yeah.
So what he says goes.
Right.
He doesn't need anyone to be on
his side. Yeah.
He just is himself, and life carries on for everyone. So I think that's part of where that comes from. It's not necessarily ambiguity so much as he doesn't need to care if the people he's interacting with are good or bad.
Right.
He can deal with them regardless.
Right. They're not a threat to him. No, I mean, that's clearly what his mastery means, right?
Yes.
That nobody has power over him in his domain. So, yeah, he's like, why doesn't he, this is a question I, have gotten many times over the years, right? Why doesn't Tom Bombadil do something about Old Man Willow and the Barrow Wights, right? If he's a good guy, why doesn't he do something about this evil that's right there in his terrain? And the answer, in one sense, is why should he bother? They're no threat to him, right? Like it's not a problem, right? It's not a problem that he has to clean up. But anyway, yeah. That's the kind of thing that I mean by moral ambiguity. And so there was, the scene doesn't lean on it hard, but there is just that like little moment. It was the glance that Galadriel and Galathu exchange when the path opens up, which seemed to be both like, on the one hand, like, whoa, who is this person who suddenly makes paths open in the woods? And also like, these trees were ignoring us hard and not responding to us and our singing at all, and B, kind of sketchy, right? And are obeying him. So like, is that a bad sign? Should we be concerned about that? Right? Like there seemed to be a sort of a moment of question there for them, and that seems to me totally appropriate. Like somebody meeting Tom Bombadil to be like, what exactly is going on here, and is this okay actually? And somebody like Galadriel, I would imagine would have that. I mean, Galadriel is does not have shall we say, does not have much of that Tom Bombadil, I'm just going to live and let everything be what it wants to be kind of spirit. That is not Galadriel's view of the world, right? So that she would not really get it in that same way. She has a very different idea of what it means to be master of a country, right? And so, yeah, I could see her having questions about that. But anyway, that was great. And so then we got the setup. So
To Bree.
yeah, the introduction to Bree. Now with that, we got mostly just like descriptions, right, and narrative. One question I had about that was, what would you say are the primary effects that we would want people to have when they see it? On the one hand, a certain degree of splendor and
Not seeing human civilization on this scale.
right. So this is something above and beyond anything that they've seen among humans. But again, see, it's interesting because, of course, the parallel of which I know you were mindful was them walking into Bree and looking around at the things and being like Sam walking into Bree and being intimidated by that. No, they're not intimidated.
I mean, Galadriel is going to be the Hundir of this,
Right.
arrangement.
Right.
She's come along to be Galadriel's companion, and she's on board with like the reasons why Galadriel's going out there, but she doesn't like humans very much.
Right.
So, she's not that keen on the smell of the city and all of that.
Right. And I would
and the destruction of the trees and all of that. So she's much more bothered by that than Galadriel, who's sort of being more instrumental and seeing, wow, human civilization, army.
Right. Look, there's an army right there.
Immediately they get a sense of this place has a military already. There's an organization, there's leadership, there's people she can talk to. So it's not going to take very long for her to work out that this is exactly what she was looking for.
Yeah, it's perfect. It's perfect. Yeah. But yeah, it's interesting. It's a complicated kind of reveal, I think. Because again, what I'm sort of struggling with exactly how to pitch it exactly right? Because on the one hand, it needs to be grander and larger and more splendid and impressive than any human society that we've seen, right? And yet, it's going to be nothing compared to even the elf kingdoms, even compared to like Fingon's fortress, is going to be way more impressive than this. Forget Gondolin, forget Tyrion, right?
One thing they have is population.
Right. The things we should be noticing in Bree is, one, is human, not elven.
Yeah.
Right. So that should be very clear up front. But also the numbers, the sheer numbers of people in this community.
When they're looking with Tom, when they're still with Tom Bombadil and they get the first sight.
Yeah.
And the idea I had is that the viewers will not be able to see what they see. They're seeing with elven eyes, and we're not.
Right.
But they're commenting on it, so they can see it's nighttime, so they can see roads, with carts and people thronging in and out of the city already without even getting into the city. I think Galadriel says there's so many of them, so the sheer numbers is going to be something that's not elvish.
Right.
An elven city would not grow to this population level because they would go somewhere else. Like, why on earth would you?
Right. So, like a crush of people is what we're gonna see.
Another thing that's quite different is because we've talked about how the men that we contact in season 5 are up. Some of them are uplifted by the elves to some degree or another. What we see after that, what we see in comparison to these people, is that their civilizations are actually kind of made stagnant by their contact with the elves in a way that these people are not. So these people have the ability to actually to progress their society.
Well, they're no longer interacting with the elves. They've gone off in their own direction after
Right.
that.
And that's why
You
we're
know.
going to see technologies that we don't see elsewhere, things like the aqueducts and stuff like that, right?
Um, Technologies, yes, but I was thinking more of like because outside of the times where Dorloman could not sustain a city of this size, even societally. Like
Mhm.
they
Yeah,
wouldn't
they have
be
a
able to
they have a
function that way.
functioning bureaucracy. These guys.
Right.
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 The Great
And-
Dorloman does not.
Right. And I think that's the
Yeah.
biggest difference. So you have whatever you call the town where the Lord of Dorloman makes his seat of power, and then you'll have smaller villages outside, and
Mhm.
individual homesteads for the more Brethel oriented sort of people, whereas they're not interested in building a city that would like rival, because a city that would rival the size of cities like Mithrim and Gondolin and Nargothrond for humans will require a level of organization and surrender of personal freedom that I don't think the Edine are willing
Right.
at this point to give.
This is the functioning bureaucracy part of it.
Right.
So you've got administrators. There's a class of it. I mean, in Bree, there's going to have to be a class of administrators,
Correct.
as well as the military
Yes.
and the rulership and the merchant guilds or whatever they have that they organize their crafts
Right.
and they have to work out how the food gets distributed and the cloth and the where the resources and raw materials come from and how they
Right.
get converted into things that people can use and then distributed,
Yes.
and all of that has to be.
Yes. Because all of the food for the city has to come from outside, and you have to convince the people on the outside to give you their food, in one way or another.
And to grow enough food for not just
Right.
themselves, but for the whole
Exactly.
city. Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Whereas the
So as Galadriel and Galadriel are walking in, you'll see evidence of that kind of organization.
even the use of coinage itself, I think, is probably something the Edine are not on. I mean,
and the elves don't have coins, so I would think.
I mean, I don't know, but what I do know is that societies on the level of what we've been showing for Dorloman and Maedhros and in Brethel,
And Brethel, yeah.
right, like a barter economy without any kind of currency is perfectly
plausible.
sufficient
Yeah.
to sustain those. Your tax, the amount of tax that needs to be collected to support the Lord of Dorloman is presumably pretty small.
Yes.
If in fact it's not just that he has his own fields and there's just people who work them for him.
Well, you need to support the army, so people who
but they're probably mostly like citizen soldiers. They probably don't have like a professional
Like a standing army. Yeah.
Yeah.
If they're
It's one of those things where like they have whatchamacallit, they have like muster on every Sunday, and they get together and train and shoot and do all the things. Right.
Yeah, exactly. No, I would imagine that. I mean, and even having the armies basically consisting of people who are supplying their, I mean, he wouldn't have to like arm all the people because they'd be arming themselves. It would be part of the deal.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the Rohirrim are kind of like that. Like those people are not. Those guys are the riders of Rohan are not all like just sitting there waiting to throw a saddle on their horse.
There isn't a
jobs.
barracks for the riders of Rohan. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. That they all have day jobs. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Exactly.
At best, the king like has his own large herd of horses that come into use under those circumstances.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So, how how crude would the construction of the city look?
We had a couple conversations about that. And there's differing opinions of what we're looking at. The general idea is that there's varieties of building materials that could be more predominant. The fact that they're surrounded by a huge forest does lend itself to timber being involved
being predominant
pretty heavily. Yeah. However,
also
there could
the
be...
lack of massive grandiose stone ruins later on also,
suggests that the whole city wasn't made out of stone, right?
Yes. Right.
But there could be differences with the way the palace is constructed, for instance.
Yes.
So we could have some variety of building materials. It doesn't have to be strictly wood.
Yeah.
But the idea behind human civilization is, what was their goal when they built it? And if you're an elf, it's like, well, it has to be pretty.
Right.
They're not elves.
They're
So
not elves.
they did not have that as their primary concern.
I would say that the palace, the Imperial Palace, however, is designed specifically to be impressive. So I'm reminded of something that the Byzantine Romans used to do while on the march. I have been told, and that is that they used to carry baths with them, so that they could have the relative luxury of a bath, of a regular bath, and the people who they were invading would just be like, why are we even fighting these people?
Right, the army who brings a bathhouse with them. Yeah.
Right, they're obviously better than us. We could do that. Right.
Yeah, I mean, it does seem to me that in order to establish, if there's an obvious parallel or anti-parallel here with this encounter, this moment that we're showing at the end of this episode, and that's Finrod coming upon Beor and his people, right?
Yeah.
And the dynamic there, which is like Orome coming among the elves, right? The parallel to Orome coming among the elves. I am like this quasi-divine figure who has come down among you, and the crudeness of their song and of their, technology and of their clothing and everything else. And on the one hand, it's going to be hard for that not to be the case with Galadriel to some extent, right?
Yeah.
She is going to outclass them to a similar kind of degree in some ways, right?
Yes.
And yet, I think it's important that it not be parallel to that.
There's a couple of ways that this can be, we can avoid that. One is Galadriel's met humans before.
Right. So there's not
humans are part
the
of the
wonder.
story in
Yeah.
Beleriand now. So there's not that sense of new discovery.
Yes.
Galadriel knows she's going in search of humans, and she knows what that means in theory as far as species goes and so on. So she's there on a diplomatic mission because she knows that these are people for whom one can engage in diplomacy.
Yes.
And she's been involved in that before.
Yes.
When they were kicking the humans out.
Yes.
She was involved. So that's not such a mystery. Like that means it's not like Orome and it's not like Finrod.
No, it is. That does make it different. But the thing that I would want to be different also, but not wholly unlike at the same time, is the sense of like her descending among savages, like the difference between her and them. Not only that they're not gonna like Beor and his people wake up and like mistake her for a god. Like, not only is that not gonna happen, but she herself is not going to. I mean, I agree. She knows about humans, but again, like, she's not gonna feel the same kind of disparity.
Also, the humans that came over the mountains, like Beor, crude is the term that you use,
Yeah.
and it's the term Tolkien uses. But they, they've been wandering, and they've been like going
Sure.
westward for time. And these guys have been, they're not people who came west seeking the light,
Right.
like the other Edain. So they've, they're. I'm okay with them being less crude than
Yeah.
Edain,
Absolutely.
because they have been settled for longer, and they weren't on a mission to move westward in the way that the other houses were.
Yes. As Sojourner says, she's wanting something from them versus the best possible type of patronage in the other encounters. Yeah. She's not. Finrod adopts them, right?
Yeah.
When he meets them.
Yeah.
She's not going to adopt them, right? But I think
Orome adopts
so
them too.
Orome adopts them too. Yeah, exactly. And there is always, to the end of Beor's life, that kind of parental, quasi-parental relationship between him and Finrod. Like there's an element of that. There is, as much as Finrod respects and admires and loves Beor, there's always that quasi-parental relationship, right? And I think that needs to be kind of complicated, because on the one hand, Galadriel's not going to be thinking that way. First of all, as you say, the situation is quite different. But I think there needs to be something in her reaction at the beginning, like, this is different. Like,
Yes.
this is different. There is something, even the elements that you're talking about like their currency and the complexity of their society and thing. It's different, right?
Yeah.
This is not.
Do you want dialogue in that scene, or because we come back to this in the next episode?
I don't know that we need it.
So-
What I'm just mostly thinking of is like how two things, right? First of all, how do we want the view of the city to hit our viewers, right? Because again, the hard thing is we have all these elven cities which set a really high standard, right? So it's going to be hard under any circumstances to look at Bree, no matter what it's made of, and be like, wow. Like, they're not going to say wow when they've just come from Gondolin a couple episodes ago, right? Like, they're not going to be saying wow.
I think the population density, because we've been in human settlements and
Right.
they don't look anything like this.
Maybe something more like whoa, would
Right.
be
Right.
a thing instead of wow,
Like-
right?
Yeah, luckily what we're seeing most recently here is not Gondolin.
Right,
Yeah.
Like, we're not cutting from Gondolin to
right,
this.
right. We're cutting from Dorloman,
But
yeah.
Dorloman.
Yeah.
So if
Yeah.
Dorloman is
Well,
pretty
Mithrin.
much,
It's
I know that's in here too. But
Yeah.
but if we focus on Dorloman for a minute,
Have most of the Mithrim scenes be at night, so it's not as
No, but it's okay.
No,
like we
no, I
can't
want
hide
Mithrin
from
to be
that,
beautiful.
from that
Yeah, no.
contrast. Yeah,
show
yeah.
Mithrim. But the deal with Dorloman is that's the best they've got in Beleriand for humans.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
It's the pinnacle of human society. In
Dorloman
Beleriand.
is established as more cultured
Yeah.
than Brethil.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, for
however
sure.
you want to.
and they've been for a couple of generations now in close cahoots with Noldor.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
So
Even the
they're-
references about the needlecraft, that like they've
Yeah.
been learning things from the elves, and yet
Yeah.
Yeah. they're bumpkins compared to the people. Of
So
Bree.
I don't think
Well-
that this city of Bree is going to look like artistically beautiful,
Amazing and
or,
beautiful.
you know,
Yes.
like,
Yes.
Yeah, it's
I
a
would
functional city,
I would say that the palace, while not beautiful, should look
Impressive.
in a lot of ways. There should also be a lot of gilding. I feel like there would be a lot of gilding involved here, because he wants to
Show off.
impress upon
Yes.
any foreign dignitaries that come in. You want to be
When
on
we
this side.
when we
And
get
Galadriel,
okay, when we get words from Galadriel, she will pick up on that, right?
Yeah.
These are
Yes.
this was made in order to impress and even intimidate other
Yeah.
people.
but she also knows these are not humans who've interacted with Noldor, and
Yes.
this is what they've done. So
Right,
this is
on
what
their own.
humans do on their own. Yeah.
Right.
Essentially.
And she could be surprised that they could ever have done this on their own. Like,
Mhm.
they've had no contact with the elves. They've had minimal contact with the dwarves for a considerable period of time. Another thing is that and I think we can do this in the next episode that we talk about for them. So episode 8. I feel like the Emperor himself, when he is given kind of like the breakdown of how things work in their cities, right? He would be kind of like, it would be really good if like we could show you how to administer your cities more efficiently, right? And if we could kind of come in and take over and just like show you guys how to run things, because it seems like you guys are just kind of like have this like really la-di-da kind of.
Well, I'm not sure he would know enough about Elvish society to realize this.
Well, if he did, for sure. But I think that it would be interesting if we in episode 8 we came into a conversation where she had been telling him about
their right,
about their which I think would interest him,
right, or, sure, yeah.
Well, just as the elves on the other side of the mountains don't know anything about the kingdom of Bree, the people of Bree don't know anything about the elves on the other side of the mountain.
Yeah.
Anything that they know about elves is essentially the impression that the dwarves had of the Nandor all the way back in season 3, season 4. Yeah.
And so many generations ago, this is kind of lost to fairy tale at this point, right?
Well, I mean, there's probably still wood elves living in the woods of what will one day be Arnor or Eriador.
I would think there'd be elves still living in Eriador.
But they don't have contact with them.
Yeah.
They're
my assumption is that the elves are not impressed by the city of Bree, nothing to do with this.
Galadriel would take that approach.
Galadriel is, because they would have to be green elves, or not the green elves, but they would have to be the relatives of the green elves who
Nandor, for sure.
He didn't come over. So possibly some of Vari, but as far as Eriador, probably more likely Nandor.
Right.
But
So yes, we know some Nandor stop before you cross the Misty Mountains. Maybe some of them stop before you cross the Blue Mountains.
You'd think, right? Yeah, I mean that's exactly what I would think. Exactly. But not like a society of them. Just some of them still wandering around.
Yes.
In Eriador. Yes. Yeah.
That's how it would.
So on the one hand, I do think that Galadriel needs to be surprised and impressed. By their numbers, yes, but not just their numbers. Like, this is more... And I love the idea of them coming in on, like, the day of a triumphal parade, which both emphasizes the crazy numbers of people, because it would be crushing crowds lining the streets. But also, even if the city is not impressive by Elvish standards of, like, beauty and architecture and things like that, the pageantry of a triumphal parade would still be pretty impressive. The banners and the, there's going to be...
It's probably also something of a wonder of social engineering, this whole thing.
Yes. Yeah. And of course, there at the heart of it is the splendid army, right? Being shown off in all of its glory, which is, definitely going to catch the attention of Galadriel. So she is in this way, her arrival is in that sort of anti-parallel to Finrod's arrival with Beor and his people, in that she is the one, not mistaking them for gods, but she's the one who's sort of impressed, right? Well, and Finrod, by contrast, she blends in with the crowd, like nobody even notices her at first when she comes in.
At first, yeah.
Yeah.
We'll change that immediately next episode.
Yeah, absolutely.
But when Finrod met Beor, he didn't know there were people there to meet. So he was completely surprised.
Absolutely.
Galadriel came here seeking out people and specifically seeking out an army. So she's found what she's looking for. It's a very different feeling to find what you're looking for than to stumble upon something.
Right, exactly.
And Orome was looking. So it's maybe more akin to that.
Right, exactly.
So Jonah brings up an interesting parallel to Dune, about how while and it's not 100%, it's not 100% parallel, I don't think, but the Atreides come to Arrakis
seeking power, seeking allies.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, and they discover the Fremen, and they have this really impressive warrior culture and all that. I think that this is certainly more. I don't like the use of the word civilized, but I kind of see civilized as kind of a negative in this way.
No.
Anyway, so yeah,
I totally agree. I mean, like, the dynamic that is totally not there in this story that is there in Dune is like the fact that the Fremen are trying to conceal the the level of their society and their power. They're trying to appear weak, right? And so that dynamic, right, that the Atreides suspect that they're not actually weak and few, right? And of course turn out to be perfectly correct about that. That's a thing that makes it very, very different from this. The other thing that is also different is that the Atreides feel themselves to be in a totally vulnerable position, know themselves to be in a totally vulnerable position, and their hope, right, their gamble is that they can turn it around unexpectedly with the aid of the Fremen. Galadriel, the elves need help, but not that much help, right? They're not in that same. Their position is very unlike that of the Atreides in that way. So there are some parallels that are interesting, but I find both of the halves of that equation sufficiently different that it really changes the dynamic. But one other dynamic that I wanted to mention is, although she comes in and is impressed, like sort of surprised and impressed by what she sees, not only the numbers but all the other stuff we're talking about, I think there still has to be a degree of superiority by Galadriel. Like,
we're gonna get
she
that
has
in
to
the
look
next
down
episode.
on them at least a little bit, right?
Yes.
Well, more than a little bit.
More than a little bit. Okay, yeah. Good.
we're gonna get that for sure.
Yeah.
Episode 5 is full.
Okay, good. Yeah. So as far as as I said, there are two first impressions that we have to manage in this one short scene, right? One is the first impression on the viewers, and the second is the first impression on Galadriel, right? We will see her first reaction to these people, and so we want to show her to be surprised and impressed and in a sense delighted, like, oh my goodness, I came looking for this. This is not only exactly what I was looking for, this is 10 times more than I was hoping to find.
Be incremental in the montage, because first of all, they're coming into the city. Well, there's lots of people and signs of sophisticated social organization, which is useful. The army is going to be the icing on the cake. And then to be presented with clear leaders to whom I can now talk. Now I know who I need to talk to.
Right.
Already, just in that opening bit.
It would be particularly funny if they were coming in like, a side entrance to the city, basically. Right?
Yeah.
And the people that they're seeing in the street, which seems like pretty significant population density, is actually the emptiness of the rest of the city because everyone's at the parade.
Right.
Well,
also, these are all the people who are they're all going in that direction.
Right.
Too,
right. So and they'll hear the noise. Right.
Right.
She'll be like, what's that sound? She wouldn't even recognize the sound of like thousands of people shouting.
Yes.
We have a shelf in our minds for that sound. She wouldn't.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And so, I mean, at the most, she would think it was like
large sporting events and so on.
Exactly. Right. She would have no parallel for that. She might wonder or suspect there's like a battle going on or something in the middle of the city or whatever. But yes, to have like there be comparatively few people, but it would still seem like a lot to her. I mean, again, Marie, as you said, the juxtaposition with Dorloman, right, compared to the people. We saw a crowded square, right, as Hurin was being announced at the beginning. To show a square in which there are at least that many people, all kind of moseying in the direction of the parade, right? Yep. And then she gets to the parade, and it's just like nothing she ever even imagined, to see all of these, sea of people. I could imagine her climbing up to a vantage point, right?
Yes.
Where she can look out over, like the huge central square and the palace and the army and the crush of people, like an audience in front of the Pope, right?
And climbing in a
Rome.
way that would be like a huge social faux pas,
right?
In the human society, like people don't just like climb up the side of a building. That's you're not supposed to do that.
Right. Or at least she would be acting very differently from everyone else around her. Not to mention that she can probably climb better than they can. But
Yes.
Anyway, yeah. No, so that's and then to have that, like the final scene being her, looking over the, sort of surging crowds.
I'm thinking of the parade at the end of Star Wars 1, the Phantom Menace.
Yeah.
When Boss Nass comes in, right, and that whole thing. But which is actually a relatively uncrowded scene,
right?
When you think about it, it would be like 10 times more people there than that.
Right. Yeah.
They will have a much bigger visual effects budget for crowd
yeah,
scenes.
exactly.
Oh, sure.
For crowd scenes.
Than Star Wars,
Well, obviously. I mean, yeah, please. We have standards after all.
I mean, to be fair, you can do a crowd scene with the software that has iterated from Massive, that was designed by Weta Digital,
yes,
for really cheap now.
Yes.
It's not even close.
It's not that. It's not as hard as when Lucas was trying to do it, for sure.
Yeah.
That's fair.
Awesome. Yeah. Okay. No, that's great. That's great. I really like that. I really like that ending. One of the other things, of course, going back, Marie, to one of the original points of discussion, even if we are leaving this episode with healthy skepticism about the odds of the Union of Maedhros to win this war, ending on this note of like, well, okay, maybe, especially since it gets
Right.
planted by Maedhros at the beginning, but the men are very numerous, right? And
Yes.
Fingon's like, well, kinda, but whatever. And then to end
And
with
there
this
they
note,
are.
right? Well, actually, like, you want to talk about
You
numerous,
have
right?
no idea.
Exactly. Maedhros'
which
plan is
actually,
better than
that
he
would-
knows. Yeah.
I think that's right. That crowd scene would assuage any
Yeah.
like skepticism the viewer might have that Maedhros' plan is never going to work.
Yeah, this is a whole new game, in fact. Like, it's this, if we're talking about an army on this scale, there can be not even any comparison to, the previous situation.
This army is probably at least as large numerically as the army that Morgoth sent out in the Dagor Aglareb.
Sure.
Which is still like in small in comparison to what he can field now, but also like I think have we said at this point that the orcs are equivalent individual for individual to men, or are we like Tolkien saying that the men were stronger back then, and so it's not 1-to-1, it's more like 1 to 1.5.
It's hard because I can't help but think that the orcs must have been greater than they
Same.
came
Yeah,
to be
that's
also, right? I mean,
But we do have Hurin killing how many of them at the end of the
Hurin,
season? Yeah, I
mightiest
know.
human ever.
extreme
get it.
circumstances.
Yeah, but he killed 70.
Yeah.
How many
So-
people did Samson kill with a jawbone? I mean, come on.
Okay.
That's virtually
Yeah.
the same story.
Virtually
Yeah.
the
Okay.
same story.
But
Yeah.
Uncontroversial statement.
Boromir only falls because he's by himself and he gets struck by many arrows.
right.
Like,
right.
Boromir could have held his own against
Right.
numerous
Yeah.
Uruk-hai.
So I would say that when he says that they were mightier back then, I think he means relative to the people they were fighting. So while sure, I would say that that first age orcs are superior to third age orcs, maybe Uruk-hai excluded.
Yeah, that's the whole
Different
separate.
situation.
Right. Though that the Edain were another step above that.
Though the Numenorians are clearly greater than they.
Yes.
Like, there's a
Like the Numenorians are almost like
There's
They're
like
at
an S
least-
curve.
Yeah.
Right.
They're at least more
Humanity.
Aquendi level.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
Numenorians. Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah, the Numenorians are what happened when you max all of your elven connections.
All your sliders.
Right.
You
Yeah.
put all your sliders up.
Max out sliders. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I mean, I can imagine. It just, in this direction, a thought that that Galadriel might have, or even might, in an unguarded moment, betray, would be something along the lines of, and yet they're just humans.
Mm.
This is a big army, right? But I mean, you have to discount it. She's probably thinking that, right? She probably, this is not like it's an army of elves or something.
It would be a little awkward for her to say that to Galadriel as well, though, because Galadriel is not Calaquendi. So, here's Galadriel standing at the top of the pyramid, right?
Right.
Talking down
But
to
I can imagine
Galadriel, who is...
But Galadriel could say it to Galadriel.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
It's easier there because
they don't.
she's on the side of the
Galadriel's
pyramid.
and Galadriel's not of they've kind of eschewed military kind of involvement in the war on Morgoth and all of that. The Green Elves.
Yes.
They're not involved anymore, and they've suffered. But they can see what the Noldor are capable of.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's something Galadriel could say to Galadriel, and Galadriel could agree with her.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Anyway, so I'm sorry. I'm just now kind of setting up for things in the next episode. But
which we will have ample time to discuss.
Yeah, plenty of. No, that's great. I love this. The sort of the shock here. And of course, the delightful thing about A, B, and C plots like this is to kind of feel the resonance among them, right? And on the one hand, the C plot is with the A and B plots being so very closely parallel, despite the fact that they're in very different contexts. But the business about trust and union, right, which ties those two plots so closely together.
Yes.
The C plot is sort of on its own in a sense. Yeah, it's not nearly as. But I like the fact that Galadriel's discovery of the humans, it sets. We're primed to be asking these questions, right?
Yes.
Can you she's going to form a union with them? She obviously is going to want to form a union. Can she trust them? Right? And so, the other two plots inform this, sort of set up and inform the C plot. They prompt us to ask all of the correct questions, and to notice that Galadriel perhaps won't be asking all of the correct questions, right, when the time comes, moving forward. But yeah, I really like that element of the end of it.
One thing that I really like about this plot line is how many twists it has in it, how many turns it has, where people are going to be are these the bad guys?
Right.
Because Galadriel doesn't really like them right up front, which is kind of that's a bad sign, right?
Right.
And then there's some other stuff that happens that, maybe these people are involved with the bad guys.
Yeah.
And then Sauron gets talked down to by Ulfang, which makes him look pretty good. But then Galadriel tries to enter Ulfang's mind, which triggers his memory of what Sauron told him, and now he's mad at her, so maybe they're the bad guys. And then just when it seems like they've completely won Ulfang over, right, then Uldor kills him. Right. Is he the bad guy?
Yeah.
Right. So I really like how many times, because we're ultimately we're not really truly going to be able to surprise the viewer with something like this.
Right.
However, to at least make it interesting, the path to betrayal, I think is
no, that's exactly it. It's
the time.
I certainly am never of the I'm never of the frame of mind that a plot fails if the viewers do not reel back in shock and surprise when it happens, right?
Yeah.
I think it's far more effective when the reveal is merely like the final and satisfying confirmation of like what you've been suspecting in a sense all along. Like it's for it to be the fulfillment and the again, surprises. Withholding information is easy. Like that's cheap in storytelling, to merely withhold information and therefore surprise people when you finally reveal it, right?
So what I really enjoy is when somebody surprises me while also telling me all along that they're going to do that. So like when I get to the surprise, I'm like, oh, I saw that whole, like I should have seen that coming. Like that's to me the most satisfying kind of surprise, but that's really difficult.
It is
That's
really
Well,
That's
in
what we were
small ways
trying.
it's easy, but like, well,
That's-
okay, I was watching something that had a two competing groups, and there's someone who needs to be rescued, and the question is which one's going to get rescued first, and their guys have a helicopter that's searching for them, and the helicopter finds something, and so they're relaying back information like, okay, I think we've got a lock on, whatever, and then you see the people waiting to be rescued look up, and there's a helicopter coming, and the lights are on them, and they're like, okay, we're getting rescued, and they get pulled up into the helicopter, and it's the other guy's helicopter.
Yeah, see, I don't like
Right.
that.
But
that,
you knew the other guys had a drone out that was searching,
Yeah,
and you knew that they were looking for them. So you knew both groups were looking for these
yeah.
people who needed rescue. So it was just they fed you enough to make you think they're going to get rescued by the good guys or
Yeah.
their
So that
guys.
was this was the kind of trickiness with the Hurin and Morwen where we leave them this episode, because in the next episode it should be like when things aren't going well, viewers I
should
hope
be like,
will be that was going to happen.
I see that. I saw that coming.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
But without us kind of banging them over the heads with it in
Yes.
the proposal.
They still had a sweet moment together where they're
They
both
did.
earnestly trying to get it right,
Yes.
So one of the greatest pleasures of my my game mastering career has been to give enough information to my players. There are two immensely satisfying things that can happen. You can either give enough information to your players so that they figure out the plot and they get to the conclusion at just the right moment. Like it's really hard to stick that landing, and it's very satisfying.
Yes.
Another satisfying thing is when you drop hints the whole way that they could have figured out, but they still don't, right? And then they have no one to blame but themselves. And so, and I think that that walking that tightrope is the most difficult and yet most satisfying kind of surprise. And I think that a lot of people try to do that and fail because it's closer to the kind of surprise where we just have withheld information from you.
Yes. Yes. Yep. Yeah. Agreed. Well, we will see. It will be a fun storyline to continue to develop.
Yes.
But that's why I wanted to talk about it a little bit more to make sure, because I was really interested in the description, and many of the things, the elements of the description, like the coinage and the aqueducts, were two things that jumped out at me right away as things which were like would have a particular effect both on the viewers and on Galadriel. But I wanted to think that through a little bit more so that we could make sure that we're on the same page with what's at stake and what that final effect, especially since it's the end of the episode, right? Want to make
final
sure,
image.
define exactly the notes that we're trying to hit there. But anyway, so that'll be fun. That'll be fun moving forward. Okay. Is there anything else that we forgot to talk about? No, there is not. Okay, there we go. So our next discussion is going to be, well, we're not 100% sure what it's on yet, but we know when it will be, and that will be Thursday, August 15th. So we will be meeting again in 2 weeks. After that, things get uncertain, as once again, as happened 2 years ago, it seems probable that the new episodes of Rings of Power are going to be dropping on some film nights. And so we're kind of waiting to see what exactly is going to be happening there. We may go on a little hiatus during Rings of Power season from film. In which case we'll be back. The next one won't be until, October. We'll miss a couple months there. But we'll see. Perhaps we will know more.
If that happens, I may have to slide my entire sleep schedule over a few hours and just have watching Rings of Power be the first thing I do on Thursday.
I have no idea what time it's going to drop in Australia.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, because it's not going to be the same.
I don't even know. I've heard rumors that they might try to do a single worldwide time. They did that. Prime Video did that for The Boys season last season. I understand, to have one time, which meant it was dropping at 3 a.m. in the morning Eastern time or something. I mean, it's when you do that, you are guaranteed to have a really uncomfortable time drop for almost every, for a large portion of the world.
Well, and even if it's in a good time during the day, I mean, it's not necessarily a good time where I'm available to watch it.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I honestly don't know the plan. I'm trying to get what confirmation I can, only on account of I kind of enjoy being able to plan my life more than 1 week in advance. But anyway, here we are. So so much uncertainty about that. But the one thing we feel confident about is that 2 weeks from now, on Thursday the 15th, we will be back and having our next discussion, which you'll have to tune in to find out exactly what it is that we talk about in 2 weeks. All right. Thank you guys so much. Marie and Alana, I thought it was excellent. I mean, and really impressed by the collaboration. I think it's, there's a kind of irony, right? That one of the primary impressions I had from this was the two plots in the episode work together and paralleled each other so intimately. That was amazing. And that was, the first time we had two people working on it like that. So that was awesome.
And we didn't just after the script discussion, we didn't actually discuss our scenes.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
We did kind of, I think we have tried it at least once before. This is definitely the most successful collaboration on a script we've had this far.
Yeah, that was excellent.
It's fun.
So thank you guys for your work. That was just delightful. Really appreciate that.
Yeah, fun for us too.
Yeah, good. All right, and I will look forward to episode 5 whether we get to that in August or whether we get to that after our little hiatus. Then we will see. I look forward to continue moving through, but I can be patient. So the writing team can have as much time as they need in order to push things forward. All right. Well, thank you, everybody, and thanks, everyone, for listening. And I will say, as always, thanks for listening and Godspeed.